The topic I chose for my final project was urban migration, which refers to the process of people moving from rural areas to urban areas, or cities. Already, the population of the world is growing at a rate faster than people are dying, so with the already large population, the urban population is growing at a similar rate. By 2050, 68% of the world's population will live in urban areas. As a soon-to-be college graduate looking for jobs in cities, this poses a potential issue for me. With all the people moving to cities, they will need housing as well as employment. This will increase the competition for current and future graduates to have housing and employment. To start off this project, we did an annotated bibliography conducting research to gain some more background information. I looked at urban migration on a local, national, and international level. Many countries are experiencing the effects of urban migration, but the impact in each country can be significantly different. A few of the countries that I researched were Ethiopia, Nigeria, Asia-Pacific countries, and the United States. Ethiopia is one of the least urbanized countries in the world with one of the highest urbanization rates. A study was conducted to explore the rural push factors and the urban pull factors that cause people to migrate. The study found that people were moving to urban areas for better employment, better quality of life, and to escape unsafe living conditions. The migrants believed that they would have more opportunities in urban areas. Some of the major effects of urban migration in Ethiopia included overcrowding, strain on social services, specifically health-related, rising food costs, growing number of unemployed migrants, and insufficient urban housing. In 1970 in Asia, only 23% of the population was living in urban areas. However, as of 2014, about 50% was living in urban areas, which is double the number it was in 1970. The research that was conducted explored the challenges faced by the countries as a result of the rapid increase in migration. A major issue encountered is that the housing industry cannot keep pace with the demand for housing. This leaves many migrants homeless or crowded into poor living conditions. Another issue is that many migrants do not have sufficient funds to compete in the housing market, so again, they are left homeless. Nigeria is another country that is not as urbanized, but still has a high migration rate. A longitudinal study was conducted in order to determine what influenced people to migrate to urban developments. 94% of people said that they migrated in order to get better jobs and to increase their earnings. Because of the overwhelming number of migrants, there was extreme overcrowding along with a lack of housing, which increased the spread of communicable diseases and pollution. An interesting urbanization factor that this research explored was the fact that industrialization is moving at a much slower pace than urbanization. And finally, for Charlotte and the United States as a whole, Charlotte has one of the highest migration rates in the United States. However, the United States is more developed than some of the other countries I previously discussed, so they aren't faced with as many problems. However, the major problems are related to housing and employment opportunities. In addition to that research, I looked at some facts discussing the differences in migration locally and globally. In Afghanistan, one of the least developed countries, the urban population grew by about 5 million over a 13-year span. In 2050, about half of the population, or 25.6 million people, are expected to live in cities. In 2017, 19,600 people moved to Charlotte, which breaks down to about 54 people a day. In Charlotte, housing and resources are the biggest issues being faced. Underdeveloped countries experience much more negative impacts, including housing, healthcare, and increased crime. However, the governments of these countries are not as developed, so urbanization is not an issue that has a clear solution at the global level. For this project, I conducted 3 different interviews. I chose the people I did because they are all in a different department or section of the housing industry in Charlotte, so they would each be able to provide me with unique insight. The first person I interviewed was John Porter. He is the Executive Vice President of Charter Properties Incorporated. This company provides apartment communities and service throughout the Carolinas. The second person I interviewed was Julie Porter. No relation to John Porter, I asked during my interview. Julie is the president of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Housing Properties. This company is a nonprofit housing development corporation trying to expand affordable housing for low and moderate income families. And the final person I interviewed was Jeffrey Vernon, a building code administrator for the Mecklenburg County Code Enforcement. And they're responsible for building permits, code enforcement, and all building inspections. So to talk about each interview specifically, speaking to John, he believes that urban migration has gained momentum in the past years and doesn't seem like it is going to slow down. Because of this momentum, there has been a major increase in the housing demand from low-income housing to multi-million-dollar homes, so it's not just the low-income housing that people are looking for. However, because of this increase in demand for housing, there has been more competition among builders for the land to build it on, which increases the price of these lots. John also mentioned that in order for builders to produce affordable housing, the government needs to be involved because it is a very expensive process. But he believes that Charlotte is headed in the right direction and is looking to resolve some of these problems. When I interviewed Julie, she said that there is an extreme lack of affordable housing and that the deficit is growing every year. Currently, there is a 2.3-month supply of housing when in the past it has been a 6-month supply. That's about a third of what it should be. Because of this shortage, the prices have escalated extremely, which makes it more difficult for people to live in these places. Also, Julie mentioned that the biggest obstacle is finding land to build on, which is why we see so many buildings going up, because there's not a lot of land available to continue growing outward. An interesting thing about Charlotte in particular is that it is one of the only cities that has the ability to reinvent itself. So Charlotte will tear something down in order to build something else new, so it doesn't really seem like there's a lot of historic connection to certain buildings. Julie has mentioned that there are already a few places in Plaza Midwood that have been torn down to have something else built in its place. Finally, Julie has said that there is a lot of community activism for people trying to solve the affordable housing issue. She mentioned that there is a church that has a very large parking lot, and they are donating some of that land to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Housing Partnership in order for them to build more affordable housing. And the last person that I interviewed was Jeffrey Vernon. He showed me a chart with the current units that are currently in production, and it's about 18,000, which seems like a lot. However, with the current housing demand, they need about 25,000 units, which is a pretty significant shortage. Also, because of the land availability, builders are going up because they cannot go out, like I previously mentioned. And a big takeaway from my interview with Jeffrey was that because all of the costs of productions have increased, so getting the land, building, blah, 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 housing has become more expensive as a whole. So this makes it difficult for people moving to Charlotte who do not have a job or who are living below the poverty line. They are unable to afford the housing that is available, which can increase the number of homeless people that we are seeing. So based on all of the research and interviews that I conducted, I came up with 2 recommendations to help combat the impact of urban migration has on the housing industry. My first suggestion is to create more affordable housing. Government intervention will be necessary to enable the housing to be subsidized and more affordable, but this will give people an opportunity to move to cities without having set employment, and it helps them be more successful in finding a job because they have somewhere to live and they're not worrying about finding somewhere to live and finding a job. Another suggestion is for the government to instill policies that put a restriction on the amount of migration to a city or country in a given year. So while these policies are difficult to have approved and might not be liked by a majority of citizens, they might help lessen the burden of migrants by limiting the numbers allowed. So this would also help lessen the burden of the housing industry because there will no longer be as much demand. So that will help lessen the overall impact that urban migration is having on a lot of cities. And here are some of the references that I used for this project.